Hello and welcome to Safe for Work PMQs with me, Graham Hughes. Where I'm told not to swear. I've been told very strongly not to swear during PMQs, which is sometimes quite difficult because it's the kind of thing that makes you want to swear. Now I realise that they're still talking. Just checking there that the chat is the wrong chat that's come up. That's bad chat, Graham. Sort out your chat, you lunatic. Just give me 1 second and I will do that for you. They haven't started yet, so don't worry. You're not missing anything in particular. I just need to do this and then do that and then do that and then do that. Okay, ta-da! There you go. Morning from Texas. Hello, Texas. So Kenny Badenoch is talking at the moment. And there's a lot to get through today in Prime Minister's questions. There's going to be, obviously, mocking of the Tories for their incredible by-election defeats last week, in which they got their arses well and truly kicked, their backsides kicked. Here we go again, says Plumduff, indeed. We've got Emma Llewell Book asking a question there, I think, to Maria Caulfield. So as soon as it starts, I will be right in there. But yeah, so the bankers' bonus caps are being decapitated. So bankers will be able to make loads of money out of dodgy deals like they did in the run up to the to the credit crunch, which was fun. Do you remember the credit crunch? Yeah, that was great, wasn't it? Brace yourselves for crap, people. Get a Valium. Lol. Okay. Right,
I'd like to welcome
we're coming to Prime
the
Minister's
grandson
questions.
of Mahatma Gandhi, and welcome to this chamber.
Grandson of Mahatma
We now
Gandhi.
come to
We
questions
didn't
to
actually get to
Prime
see him,
Minister.
but,
I start with Stuart C. MacDonald.
Question
Oh,
number
God.
1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Question
Prime
number one.
Minister.
What's the question
Mr.
number
Speaker,
one?
I know that the sympathies of
he
the
will
whole
list
House
his
are with
official
all those
engagements.
affected by Storm
It's 1
Banner,
year.
and in
1 year he's
particular
been
the
in
friends
office.
and
1
families
year,
of
man.
those who lost their lives.
Yeah, this
Mr. Speaker,
pathetic
this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join the Prime Minister in expressing my sympathies to all those affected by the recent storms? But, Mr. Speaker, 2 million people just cannot be sustained from 20-odd aid lorries. Utter catastrophe is being unleashed in Gaza. Doesn't the Prime Minister now see that only a humanitarian ceasefire can bring about the scale of emergency aid that is needed? Of course, Israel has a right to defend itself in line with international and humanitarian laws, but we must also speak out when those laws are breached. So surely he agrees that depriving 2 million civilians, 1 million children of food, of water, medicines and fuel is not in accordance with international law. Will he press Israel to restore the supply of these essentials for the sake of innocent civilians and the future of the entire region?
More strongly for a ceasefire.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's important that we do everything we can to get humanitarian aid to those who need it in Gaza, which is why on Monday we're announced a doubling of our international aid to the region,
Call for a
and
ceasefire.
why the Development Minister is actively engaged with our partners on
Call
the
for a
ground to
ceasefire.
ensure that aid gets to those people as quickly as possible.
Alberta Coulson.
By calling a ceasefire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Double child rapist and murderer Colin Pitchfork had yet another parole review hearing only a few weeks ago. I thank the Justice Secretary for having listened to me and engaged the reconsideration mechanism rule. Now, I know the Prime Minister doesn't have any decision-making role within the Independent Parole Board. It's independent of government, but it is a wing of the executive. It is not the judiciary. Now, does the Prime Minister agree with me that men who rape and brutally murder young women, as Mr Pitchfork did to Dawn Ashworth and Linda Mann in my constituency, does he agree that generally, as a point of principle, these sexual offenders should remain in prison for most of their natural lives?
I agree with my honourable friend that the public should be confident that murderers and rapists will be kept behind bars for as long as is necessary to keep the public safe. And that's why we're reforming the parole system. Our victims' bill will mean that minimising risk and protecting the public are the sole considerations in probable decisions. It will also give the Justice Secretary the power to step in on behalf of the public and take a second look at decisions to release the most serious offenders, including murderers and rapists. And last week we announced that we will be introducing longer sentences for dangerous criminals for the most heinous crimes. Life
There's no room in the prisons for them, mate.
We come to the leader of the opposition, Keir
manage anything properly.
Can I join the Prime Minister in his comments about all those affected by these storms? Can I start by welcoming the new member for Mid-Bedfordshire? The first Labour MP ever to represent those beautiful towns and villages. He defied the odds, history, and of course the fantasy Lib Dem bar charts. Can I also welcome the new member for Tamworth?
Yay!
She will be a powerful representative for her constituents. Is the Prime Minister as relieved as I am that those constituents are not burdened with his defeated candidate who told them, don't worry, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to sanitise this, to F off if they're struggling with the cost of living?
That's what he said.
Well,
that's what he said.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of what this government is doing to support the most vulnerable over the past year. But, Mr. Speaker,
I'm not going to take lectures
join
off
him in welcoming the new members to their places? After all, I suspect the new member for Mid-Beds may actually support me a little bit more than the last one.
Okay, I'm going to give you that one, Rishi, since it's your birthday.
Although I did notice that the new member said that they will be opposing new housing in their local area, while the new member for Tamworth claimed that they will protect green spaces. I would urge them to have a word with their leader, because that's not exactly his position, Mr. Speaker. Although, with his track record of U-turns, who knows what his housing policy will be next week?
U-turns,
so much for being the change candidate, he can't even distance himself from those appalling comments. But I do have to ask him, where on earth does the Prime Minister think his candidate got the idea in the first place that throwing expletives at struggling families was his government's official position?
Prime Minister!
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's just look at the record of what this government is doing to help those people.
What?
Paying for around half of a typical family's energy bill over the last year, support worth over £1,500. For the most vulnerable in our society, receiving £900 in direct cost of living support, record increases in the national living wage, record increases in welfare, and this winter, Mr. Speaker, pensioners to receive an extra £200 or £300 alongside their winter fuel payment to help them through what we know is a tough time. All of that, Mr. Speaker, significant support funded by this government, all of that would be put at risk by Labour's reckless plans to borrow £28 billion a year.
He just bragged about giving £18 a week.
He keeps boasting about how great things are. The voters keep telling him he's got it wrong. But I can see why the Tamworth candidate thought he was just following government lines. Yes. Annalisa and her 2 children lived in their home for 8 years. In May, they were kicked out with a no-fault eviction notice.
Yeah, which they've U-turned on.
Despite his government's pledge to scrap no-fault evictions, this week the Prime Minister crumbled to the landlords on his own backbenches and killed the policy.
Are landlords.
What message, other than the message delivered by his candidate in Tamworth, could Annalisa possibly take from that?
Prime Minister, Speaker, we've taken significant action to help renters like Annalise and others. We've capped holding deposits at 1 week. We've protected tenants from rip-off tenancy fees, delivered almost 500,000 affordable homes for rent, and halved the number of percentage of substandard homes in the private rented sector, and strengthened local authority enforcement powers, because this government is delivering for renters. But we are also, Mr. Speaker, trying to ensure the new generation can buy their own home. So perhaps he can explain to Annalisa and thousands of millions of others why, when we brought forward plans to unlock 100,000 new homes, he stood in the way of that.
know you could have done that. How did he stand in the way of it?
Just to say, it's Prime Minister's questions, not
How did he
opposition
stand in the way of
questions.
it? Yeah, exactly. Sorry, before we go on, how did Starmer stand in the way of that when, since Starmer's been leader, the Tories have had an up to 80-seat majority in Parliament? Just explain. Someone let me know in the chat how that works.
Sorry, Prime Minister. It is Prime Minister's questions. I don't need you nodding against my decision. Yes.
Well, I'm sure Annalise and her children who've now been evicted will take great comfort from that non-answer. Emma and her teenage son saw their mortgage go up by more than a quarter. Well, they may think this is funny. This is real life. After 16 years of dutifully paying their mortgage, for the first time, she's having to choose between new shoes for her son and putting the heating on. All because his party crashed the economy, pushing mortgage rates to their highest levels in decades. He says ignore all that. Ignore the fact that the guilty men and women responsible are standing again as his candidates and still setting his policy. Can he not see why Emma might think that his party is telling them exactly where to go?
Mr. Speaker, he keeps talking about the mini-budget. I won't ask him a question, Mr. Speaker. Well, I will just point out he did actually support 95% of the things in that mini-budget, which I didn't, Mr. Speaker. But again, he's had a whole summer to get on top of the details. He's still ignoring the fact that rising interest rates are a global challenge. They are at their highest level in America and Europe for more than 20 or 30 years. Mortgage rates have doubled in America, trebled in Europe. Now, what we do want to do to help mortgage holders is ensure that they can use the mortgage charter that we've agreed with the banks. And thanks to the steps that we've taken, someone with a £200,000 property with about £100,000 left on their mortgage could save over £350 a month and lock in a new deal 6 months before theirs ended, and repossessions will be prohibited for 12 months from the first missed payment. He might have missed that that policy is twice as generous as Labour's.
What? Labour hasn't published a manifesto.
Absolutely tone deaf. In every cafe, pub and supermarket in Britain having the same conversation. We can't afford that. Put it back on the shelf. It's too expensive. He is completely oblivious, just patting himself on the back. Emily and Jamie have worked hard and saving for years to buy their own home. They were nearly there last year, but he scrapped house building targets because his backbenchers pushed him around. House building has fallen off a cliff, shattering the simple dream of home ownership for people like Emily and Jamie. Can the Prime Minister now see that actually his candidate in Tamworth was just loyally following the party line?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think these prepared lines really aren't working for him anymore.
Prepared lines? You get these questions in advance?
He literally asked me a question about the support that we're providing for mortgage holders.
Hang on. He gets these questions in advance. So when he's talking about like prepared lines, both the questions and the answers are prepared in advance. He's not answering off the cuff here. He knows what he's going to be asked.
I gave him the answer to that question, and then he read from his script to say that we hadn't answered the question. We're providing significant help for all these people. He's moved on to housing targets, but here's the record. 2.5 million additional homes. Housing starts double what we inherited from the Labour Party. Housing supply up 10%, on track to deliver 1 million new homes, and a record number of first-time buyers, Mr. Speaker. But again, he brings up his candidates in Tamworth and Mid-Beds. As we open this session, he's now saying he wants to build homes. Well, both of those candidates want to say that they want to block new homes in their constituency.
Well, actually, Labour's liars they want to build homes.
Tell us more about it.
Stop the numbers from stopping.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, across our country, the British people are rolling up their sleeves and getting on with it, doing their best in the face of a punishing cost of living crisis and a government that has abandoned them, abandoned renters at risk of being kicked out, abandoned mortgage payers struggling to make ends meet, abandon those who dream of owning their own house. The truth is, his candidate in Tamworth summed up perfectly just how his and his Tories are treating the British public. So will he just call a general election and give the British public the chance to respond, as they did in Selby, Mid-Beds and Tamworth? They've heard the government telling them to F off, and they want the chance to return the compliment.
Hey! Very good. Very good. Very good.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, look, as we saw with his recent decisions on actually building new houses, politicians like him always take the easy way out, Mr. Speaker.
What?
We're getting on
What?
making the right long-term decisions
Yeah,
to
you're
change this
delivering,
country
you're
for the
getting on with
better.
stuff.
On net zero, on HS2,
On net
on a
zero,
smoke-free
which you've
generation,
scrapped.
on
HS2,
education
you've
and
scrapped.
energy security.
Education, you've
Contrast
scrapped.
that to his leadership.
On
Too
the
cautious to say anything
the
and
rack.
hope that nobody
The sword of
notices, Mr.
Damocles.
Speaker. Let me tell him, come that general election, the British people will.
Go on then, let's have it. Let's have the general election. Come on, let's do it now. Come on, let's do the show right here. Come on, let's do it together. It'll be fun. Come on.
I said "Oi," not more. Oi.
It's the first time I've been confused with the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker.
There's been many rumours about you.
All in good time, most of you lawyers. And it will be soon. And all of them true, Mr. Speaker. Like me, my right honourable friend has the honour and privilege of representing a rural constituency. I'm sure he, like I, occasionally feels a certain degree of frustration
Farmers and
that
village
whilst
idiots.
progress has been made in this area, the rubric of funding formulae for things like the Environment Agency, local government, the police and education still fails to adequately reflect the difficulties and challenges of delivering public service in rural areas. Can my right honourable friend, the Chancellor and the wider government use the opportunities of both the autumn statement and the forthcoming budget to explore these issues further, to give a better delivery of service for his constituents and for mine?
Can I thank my honourable friend for raising this important issue on behalf of both his and my constituents. It's vital that we have the same high-quality services in rural areas as well as our towns and cities. I am pleased to tell him that we're providing £95 million through the Rural Services Delivery Grant to help rural councils achieve exactly that. We are currently reviewing the police funding formula, and I remember working with him to ensure that the national funding formula for schools does take account of the differing characteristics of schools and their pupils. But we will continue to keep all these things under review, and I agree with them entirely. Our rural communities must be given the same funding and public services as everyone else in our country.
Brags about
SNP
taking
Deputy
funding
Leader Murray.
away. Do you remember the video from last year? Do you remember that when it leaked of Rishi Sunak bragging with voters, Tory voters in I think Tunbridge Wells, was it? Where was it? It was somewhere like that, or Kent or somewhere. And he was bragging about changing the funding formula so that the areas that needed the money the most weren't getting it. And then rich areas that vote Conservative and drive around in the Chelsea tractors, burning baby seal fare to get to the kids off, drop the kids off at the public school. They basically the money was going to them instead, which was nice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the UN warned that hospitals in Gaza had just 48 hours of fuel left to keep their electricity going. That was 28 hours ago. The electricity runs out tonight. Now, we have a human responsibility to all the people in Gaza, but we have a particular responsibility for UK citizens, some of whom are in those hospitals with no food, no water, no medicine and no way out. So I want to ask the Prime Minister, how much worse does the situation have to get before he will join us in calls for a humanitarian ceasefire?
Mr. Speaker, from the start, we have said that the first and most important principle is that Israel has the right to defend itself under international law. Our support for that position is absolute and unchanged. But from the start, we have also said that we do want British nationals to be able to leave Gaza, and that we want hostages to be released and for humanitarian aid to get in. And we recognise that for all of that to happen, there has to be a safer environment, which of course necessitates specific pauses as distinct from a ceasefire. And we discussed this with partners yesterday evening at the United Nations. And we have also been consistently clear that everything must be done to protect civilians in line with international law and continue getting more aid flowing into Gaza.
Murray Black.
Mr Speaker, the growing calls for a ceasefire is also about calming the situation in the broader region, especially the West Bank. UNICEF has reported over 2,000 fatalities and over 5,000 injured children since the conflict began due to unrelenting attacks. If we ignore this, we risk pouring petrol on a fire in a place that only requires a spark to ignite. Can the Prime Minister understand that joining calls for a ceasefire is now the best and maybe the only way to stop this conflict escalating beyond all control?
Mr Speaker, we do have to remember that Israel has suffered a shockingly brutal terrorist attack. Hamas is responsible for this conflict
for killing babies
and
in Gaza,
has the right
for God's
to protect
sake.
itself in line with international
But they're
law.
not
As the
protecting
UN
themselves
Charter
by
makes
cutting
clear,
off the
we will
power to
continue urge the
incubators
Israelis
with
to follow
babies in them. For
international law.
God.
Whilst we also have to remember that Hamas cruelly embeds
Call
itself
for
in
a
civilian
ceasefire.
populations.
Grow
But
some
we are doing
fucking
everything we can
balls
to get aid
and
into
call
the
for a
region. I'm pleased to say
ceasefire.
an RAF flight left the UK this morning for Egypt carrying 21 tonnes of aid for Gaza. The relief supplies include over 75,000 medical kits, solar lights, water filters for families and warehousing equipment. Our team are on the ground ready to receive. We will continue to do everything we can to increase the flow of aid, including fuel, into Gaza.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In the matter of Wally's Quarry, my constituents in Newcastle-under-Lyme have been utterly let down and failed by the Environment Agency.
The Environment Agency not been failed by the Tory party that's been in charge.
We now learn that all of their monitoring equipment
years.
for the last 7 years, including in your constituency, Mr Speaker, has been grossly under-recording levels of hydrogen sulphide by a factor of approximately 2 or 3 times. That's the monitoring equipment that people have been relying on to tell them that their air is safe and clean to breathe.
Younger than me. He's younger
Given
than
everything
me.
that's happened, we really need to see some proper action now. I've had enough with the EA, and my constituents have too. So will the Prime Minister do everything in his power to get a grip on this failing organisation?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise the concerns of his constituents. The Environment Agency's criminal investigation is ongoing, so I hope he can understand that I can't therefore comment further on it. But with regard to his concerns about the measurement inaccuracies, I have been assured and checked the Environment Agency is working swiftly to understand the scale of the problem. The Environment Secretary is currently monitoring the situation, and I have asked that she keeps my honourable friend regularly updated.
Colin Eastwood.
Mr Speaker, a few short months ago the world came to Belfast to celebrate the Good Friday Agreement. At the heart of that agreement was the realisation that we could not use violence as a tool for revenge or to achieve our political aims. As 1,400 Israelis and almost 6,000 Palestinians lay dying and dead, when will the Prime Minister say enough is enough? When will he call for a ceasefire? When will he tell Israel to stop meting out collective punishment on the people of Gaza? And when will he and other world leaders insist on a political solution that involves a Palestinian state for the Palestinian people?
Well, Mr Speaker, as I said, an important principle is that Israel does have the right to defend itself under international law to ensure that attacks like this, which were brutal and horrific for their citizens, can't happen again, and we continue to support that position. But as I said from the start, we've also wanted to ensure humanitarian aid can go in and hostages and nationals can come out. We recognise that that means there has to be a safer environment, which of course necessitates specific pauses as distinct from a ceasefire, and we discussed exactly this with our international partners yesterday at the United Nations, and will continue to do so. And as I made clear on Monday, we have doubled down.
You know, there's something else here. If Israel wanted to take the moral high ground, it could call for a ceasefire, and then it's on Hamas if it doesn't abide by the ceasefire. It's like, well, we've offered a ceasefire, we're trying to get supplies to people, but you won't let us. I mean, just in terms of the optics of this, it would be in Israel's interest to call for a ceasefire right now. And it would be in this dickhead's interest to call for a ceasefire as well, because it will make him look like a stronger leader than he is at the moment, instead of parroting this whole Israel has a right to defend itself, Israel has a right to defend itself, which it does up to a point. But the point that we've reached now is that there's over 6,000 Palestinians who are dead, and also in Gaza, and also the power is going to run out. This is the moment where he can stand up and, before the power runs out, and call for a ceasefire, call for Israel and Hamas to have a ceasefire to get humanitarian supplies into the Gaza Strip. But he's not doing that because he's a coward.
On our efforts to find a better future for the Palestinian people. It's been a feature of all our diplomacy in the region, and we will continue to give all our efforts to making that happen.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For too long, Bradford Council have failed to represent the best interests of my constituents, whether it be their catastrophic failures on children's services, their inability to invest our own council tax back into Keighley and Ilkley, or their refusal to instigate a review into child sexual exploitation across the Bradford district. Local residents and I are fed up of being ignored by Bradford Council, and we want out. So will the Prime Minister meet with me to discuss my case for leaving Bradford Council and creating our own unitary authority which better represents Keighley and Ilkley, putting our priorities first?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know my honourable friend is a passionate campaigner on this issue, indeed even introducing a private member's bill earlier on it this year, and I agree with him that his council should be working to ensure that it delivers good services for all its residents, including his constituents. I will certainly arrange for the relevant minister to discuss his concerns further, and as he didn't do it, maybe I can plug his event this afternoon, I believe, in the Jubilee Room, the Keighley and Ilkley showcase, where perhaps the minister can come to discuss it in person then.
William Morris.
When you're in school, there were always those particularly annoying kids who it was never their fault, even if they were found holding the football that had just gone through the window that they had kicked and it had been recorded on CCTV. They'll still say it wasn't their fault. They'll make up some elaborate excuse, like a childlike excuse, like, "Oh, I was going to kick the ball and a bird came and it distracted me and I didn't actually touch the ball, but then the strong gust of wind came and it smashed the wind." And you're thinking, what does this kid really think they're going to get away with it? And it pisses the teachers off because they're just like, why are you lying? This is like some weird form of gaslighting, but it's like pathetic gaslighting. It's so obvious that it was your fault. You obviously did it. Can't you just say, yeah, I did it, you'll be in less trouble? And you got these Tories standing up whinging about what's going on in their constituencies and blaming the Environment Agency. I mean, as opposed to 13 years of Tory misrule. And when Sunak said in his answers then he was standing up for, their record on net zero, their record on HS2. I'm just like, what? So you live in a parallel dimension in which they haven't done massive U-turns on everything involved in those issues.
It's just a year ago now that the new Prime Minister promised to unite our country, not with words, but with action. Quite rightly, voters make a judgment on actions. But in my constituency, as in many others, the Prime Minister hasn't delivered on his promises. Arbroath House in Easington Colliery is a GP practice without the funding to deliver basic community health services. Communities like Shotton, South Hetton, Hassel and Horden lack the police officers to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour. We see sewage being dumped on our coastline at Seaham and Blackhall without prosecution of the privatised water companies. We see investment for levelling up blocked for Horden. When will the Prime Minister call a general election and let Labour rise to the task of rebuilding Britain?
Prime Minister.
Mr.
Sorry, top tip, if you're going to call for a general election, if you're going to get one of your MPs to call for a general election, and they're a backbencher, make sure that A, they're not on the backbench, the actual backbench, and B, make sure that, they sound like Brian frickin' Blessed.
Speaker, the honourable gentleman raised crime. I'm pleased to say that crime is now down by over 50% since Labour were last in office, and that includes significant reduction
you took out fraud from those crime
behaviour,
statistics.
Which you mentioned, and indeed,
you took out
earlier
fraud
this year,
from those
not
crime
only did
statistics.
we meet our pledge to deliver 20,000 more police officers, a record number on our streets. Our antisocial behaviour plan is already making a difference, delivering immediate justice and clamping down on that type of activity.
Kate Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rightly support the government's plans to build more homes and ease housing shortages. However, I have significant concerns about the impacts of developments on our ageing drainage systems and the potential risks that this poses for flooding, as we're seeing in places like the Hazel Walls development in Uttoxeter. What steps will the government take to ensure that as more houses are built, existing infrastructure is also upgraded and maintained by local authorities to ensure it's not overwhelmed with additional use and less permeable surfaces?
Again, it's someone else's fault. It's the local authorities. You see, it's not the government, and the fact that they have been actually, stopping any progress, befuddling any progress in terms of green issues to moving to a 100% renewable energy grid and moving away from using fossil fuels, extinction juice, oil, gas, coal. I mean, these guys want more coal mines. They want fracking. They want us to be reliant on oil from Saudi Arabia and gas from Qatar. And now they're saying, no, well, what about flooding? Yeah, you're going to get more floods. We were told this. We were told this in the 70s. And you didn't. You spent all your time in office basically making it more difficult for us to do things that, striving towards green, making things more green. I mean, the big one for me is like onshore wind farms are still banned. They're still banned. There was no policy to bring in solar panels on the roofs of all new builds, which we could have done. It would have been easy to do. It's not a big issue. It's not a big cost when you're actually building a property to do that. And it's better to do it when the property is built, and then it can be integrated into the cost of building the property than try and retrofit panels afterwards onto roofs that aren't meant to take the weight of solar panels or meant to have the wiring of solar panels, etc. And and then the famous hundreds of, over 100 deals that Rishi Sunak did for oil exploration in the North Sea, and the opening of the Rosebank oil field, which is going to have 500 million litres of oil, or is it 500 million barrels of oil? I think it's barrels over the next few years, which will be burned somewhere around the world and will contribute to us having more floods.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, our traditional drainage systems are under increasing pressure, and that compares with the benefits of sustainable drainage systems, which work in a different way. It was already a requirement that sustainable drainage systems should be given priority in any major new developments and developments in flood risk areas. But earlier this year, we committed to requiring sustainable drainage systems in all new developments, in top of DEFRA's Plan for Water, which puts a statutory duty on water companies produce plans to set out how they will improve, maintain and extend our robust and resilient wastewater systems.
Charlotte Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I hosted the MS Society and people living with multiple sclerosis to hear about their experiences accessing personal independence payments. 10 years on from its introduction, people with MS and other fluctuating conditions are still too often being denied the support that they deserve to manage the extra costs of their condition and to retain their independence for longer. 22,524 people with MS have signed a petition calling for a full review of PIP for fluctuating conditions, which is on its way to Downing Street right now. Will the Prime Minister listen to their call?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the experiences of those suffering with MS that she mentions. I'll ensure the Work and Pension Secretary looks at their concerns and writes to the Honourable Lady.
Sir Peter Bottomley, Father of the House.
We know some duck serious questions today, aiming for electoral advantage in the future. Can I note that the Prime Minister prefers to take decisions that will benefit the country now in the longer term, so that we can have more jobs, better education and a shared prosperity?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for his kind words.
Mr. Speaker, while the final report of the infected blood inquiry has been postponed until March, Sir Brian Langstaff, the independent chair, has already published his recommendations on compensation for victims of that scandal. Can the Prime Minister explain why his government insists on postponing its response until after publication of the final report, kicking it into the long grass and delaying justice once again for my constituents Justine, Rachel and Paul, whose fathers died as a result of that scandal, as well as thousands of others across these aisles?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said previously from the dispatch box, what happened was an appalling tragedy, and my heart goes out to all of those affected and their families. I've given extensive evidence to the inquiry, so my position on this matter is on the record, but I would say there is extensive work that has been going on in government for a long time, coordinated by the Minister for the Cabinet Office, as well as interim payments of £100,000 being made to those who are affected.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has been a great champion of transport projects on the Welsh borders, including the electrification of the main line in North Wales, the reopening of Corwin Station and the Gabowen to Oswestry line, and also substantial levelling up fund investment in the Llangollen and Montgomery canals. Would the Prime Minister now deliver on the long-awaited Pant-Llanymynech bypass and also prioritise the dualling of the A5, A483 in Clwyd South and North Shropshire?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are making significant improvements to our cross-border rail services across the Union. Thanks to our decision on HS2, we can now provide an unprecedented £1 billion of investment to fund the electrification of the North Wales main line that will ensure reliable, punctual journeys between North Wales and multiple cities across west of England. We also are continuing to develop the Plant-Llanymynech bypass scheme in our next round of the road investment plans, and this section of the A5 in England will be considered by National Highways as part of the Midlands to Gloucestershire to Wales route strategy.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's important that the COVID inquiry has all the relevant documents. That's what the public, including thousands of bereaved families, expect and deserve. But despite being a self-described tech bro, the Prime Minister has been unable to locate and provide his WhatsApp messages to the inquiry. Does he agree that devices should be handed over to experts to retrieve this information?
Mr. Speaker, both the Government and I have fully cooperated to provide tens of thousands of documents to the COVID inquiry, and I look forward to giving evidence later this year.
Oh, that was a non-answer, so you're not going to hand over your...
Mr. Speaker. With the ongoing national crisis in NHS dentistry being raised here most weeks, can my right honourable friend advise as to when the dentistry plan produced by the Department of Health will be published, and can he ensure that any clawed back unspent funds are ring-fenced for NHS dentistry so as to deal with emergencies and to help clear the backlog?
Mr. Speaker, we're investing £3 billion into NHS dentistry, and the reformed dental contract is helping to improve NHS access for patients. In the last year, I'm pleased to say NHS dental activity also increased by almost a quarter compared to the year before, but the forthcoming dental recovery plan, which will be out shortly, will include action to incentivise dentists to deliver even more NHS care.
Ruth Cabri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honour to be elected to this place, and the standards by which we are expected to abide matter. So does the Prime Minister accept that it was ill-judged for him to fail to declare to Parliament that companies linked to his wife had benefited to the tune of £2 million from a fund he had set up as Chancellor? Will he correct the record now?
Shocking. Mr. Speaker, it's worth bearing in mind that the Labour frontbenchers backed the Future Fund when it was introduced. Indeed, they were calling for more funding for it, not less. The House will be aware of my wife's shareholdings in various British startups, so that's her career, which are on the record, and I'm happy to put on the record again. But it is worth bearing in mind The Future Fund helped over 1,200 different companies. Neither the government nor the British business.
You know, I did commit a murder, but there were 500 other murders this year in England. So, you know, does it really count as a murder?
Business Bank chose any of those specific investments. It was open to any British firm that met the criteria.
Shimon Ben.
No conflict of interest.
Mr. Speaker, the UK is at risk of being left behind on hydrogen engines, hydrogen ice. The EU and the USA are now recognising hydrogen combustion engines as zero emissions and are supporting their industries as all viable zero carbon technologies will be needed, particularly
It's bullshit.
for
Hydrogen is bullshit.
So I'm working with
Hydrogen is
Fenia
such
on ice and
bullshit.
many MPs because this is crucial for UK jobs, skills and manufacturing. Will my right honourable friend commit to urgently extending the scope of the Automotive Transformation Fund industrialisation grants to include hydrogen engines so we win the ice race?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government...
We win what? The ice race, was that? What's she talking about? Hydrogen is bullshit. 99% of the hydrogen that is produced for industry and for vehicles and for anything else is produced using fossil fuels. Hardly any of it is made through renewable means because it requires a lot of energy. Also, hydrogen is really, really difficult to transport. You can't put it in a pipe and you can't transmit it down a wire. You have to reduce the temperature to below minus 200 degrees Celsius. I can't stress this enough. Hydrogen is bullshit, and that's why the Tories love it.
The government is determined to ensure that the UK remains one of the best locations in the world for automotive manufacturing. Hydrogen fuel cells and their upstream supply chain are already in scope of the ATF, and support for this fund has enabled Johnson Matthey's £60 million investment in Hertfordshire to develop hydrogen technologies. But I am told by the Minister that DBT are continuing to look at the future possibilities for renewable hydrogen and will consider the fund's eligibility in light of the new developments in this space.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's an email in my inbox from a constituent who has family in Gaza. It reads, "My heart can't handle this anymore. We are being massacred, relentlessly bombed, homes are being destroyed, no water, no food, no electricity. Save the Children reported that one child is killed every 15 minutes. And as I speak, the lives of 130 babies in incubators are in danger if fuel does not reach their hospital in time. This is collective punishment of the Palestinian people in Gaza for crimes they did not commit. How many more innocent Palestinians must die before this Prime Minister calls for humanitarian ceasefire?"
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome that there is, in fact, unity across these dispatch boxes on Israel's right to defend itself in face of an unspeakable act of terror.
Why are you not calling for a ceasefire?
But it is also clear that we must support the Palestinian people. They are victims of
call
Hamas
for a
too.
ceasefire.
Hamas uses innocent people as human shields. And we mourn the loss of every innocent life, people of every faith, of every nationality. And we are working as hard as we can to get as much humanitarian aid into Gaza as quickly as practically possible.
It can't get into the country, or the strip, or the territory, whatever it is. It can't get in without a ceasefire. Oh my God, why this isn't good for my blood pressure.
Final question, Dr. Dan Poulter.
Oh, thank God for that. It's the final question.
Mr. Speaker, last week, Suffolk experienced its worst local floods for over 100 years, with communities in and around Needham Market, Framlingham, Debenham and Wickham Market particularly badly affected. Homes and businesses have been destroyed. And Suffolk, the community, has rallied together in a very stoic and pragmatic way to support those in need at this very difficult time.
I think every Tory that's asked the question today has been
can the Prime Minister offer to the people in Suffolk, those businesses and homes that have been affected by these floods, to help them to recover and rebuild?
Well, flooding is a devastating experience, and I extend my sympathies to all those affected, including those in his own constituency. I'm pleased to say that that's why, through the Flood Recovery Framework, we are confirming additional financial support for those households and businesses most effective. This will include a £500 grant for households, council tax discounts and business rates relief of up to 100% for 3 months. Small and medium-sized businesses will also be eligible for £2,500 business recovery grant and up to £5,000 grants for flooded homes to make them more resilient for future flooding. We recognise the heroic efforts, Mr. Speaker, of local councils like his and emergency responders everywhere who have been working tirelessly in affected areas. They have our thanks, and we also stand ready to consider any requests from councils for support in their recovery efforts.
That's it, I think. Just let me. That completes questions. I'll come to point one in a second.
Okay. Right, that's it. That was a bit weird. The sound went off and then it came back on again. Hello, hello, hello. Be gone with you, foul people of Parliament. They're all leaving. Do you want to watch them leave? There they go. Bye. Don't let the door hit your asses on the way out, especially your Tory scum. So I added 5 new names, six new names to my private school mafia list. Join that. There you go. Just what the hell? Just, I mean, the lies, the non-stop bloody
Mr.
lies.
Speaker,
it's painful. Oh, sorry, I don't want to turn that on. I gotta get rid of this. It's John McDonnell is talking. Oh, there you go. Okay, right. So yes, lies, damn lies, Tories. Rishi Sunak doing another PMQs there in which he didn't answer a single question, in which he was asked time and time again to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, Israel, and refused to do so. And now, Captain Bart Roberts, bang, 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 me hitting my head off the desk. Tory flood planning, £8 back for every £1 spent, remember. Oh, they've been in power for they've been in power for 13 years, and yet everything is still someone else's fault. It's the local authorities, it's the planning people, it's the environmental agency, it's the EU, it's trans people, it's the refugees coming in on the small boats. It's always a pathetic excuse for why they can't do anything. If you're a Tory voter, and if you are, why are you watching this? I have no idea. But if you are a Tory voter, then you feel betrayed by the fact that they promised all this crazy shit and said, oh, we're going to do this amazing stuff, and they haven't fulfilled any of it except making themselves richer. That's it. Making themselves richer. That's all they're interested in. And Sunak has enacted policies that will make him and his wife richer. Whether it's they want to keep the non-dom status. They don't want to get rid of that, obviously, because his wife got away with not paying tens of millions of pounds of tax over the years. She was living at one point in number 11 Downing Street and claiming she was a non-domiciled, i.e. not living here, in order to get away with not paying millions in tax. And now the bankers' bonuses are getting back-heeled. The cap on bankers' bonuses are getting back-heeled next week, next Tuesday. Actually, it's going to happen on Halloween. And there was a very good reason why that was brought in, not just in the UK, but in countries all over the world, because bankers, with the incentive of the bonuses, were selling absolutely garbage products to people because they just wanted the money. And then some idiot called in on Carol Vorderman's show this morning on James O'Brien's show that Carol Vorderman's presenting. And he said, well, if you give the money to the bankers, you'll get more in tax because they'll stay in the country and they'll pay tax on their income. And the next person who called in said what I said while I was listening to the radio and said, oh, if you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. I mean, come on. Oh, that's definitely not going to go into an offshore fund in the Cayman Islands. No way. Anyway, so thank you very much for watching. I'm going to go now. I'm going to turn my lights down a little bit. I've got my lights set for when I'm wearing my light-coloured top. And so when I'm wearing a dark-coloured top, the lighting's not right. So I look like a freaking light bulb here. So I'll sort that out for the next show. I'll be putting out a Moment of Truth later today. And then I'm going to go and see Killers of the Flower Moon with Ben Chambers of 16 Million Rising, which I really recommend. Phil will be back tomorrow morning at 9:30 for Morning Brew. And smash the like button on the way out if you would. Rain coming from the wrong way is Joseph Jones paraphrasing the horrific Theresa Coffey, who's our environmental secretary for some bloody reason. And she said this. She said, oh, yeah, the rain came from the wrong way, and that's why it caused all the flooding. And everyone sort of mocked her for this, which is fair enough. But I would point out that one of the reasons why we lost at least 1,000 trees just in my local area here in Durham back in January 2022 was because of the wind coming from the wrong direction. So trees buttress themselves up against the prevailing wind. Wind comes from the other direction. A hurricane strength, maybe not hurricane, but storm strength. Wind comes from the other direction. Trees aren't buttressed against it; they fall down, and that's what literally thousands of trees in my area did. It was so depressing going back onto the old railway lines, which are now cycle paths, and just seeing so many trees that have fallen over. And also, anyone else who likes trees, the famous avenue of trees in Northern Ireland, which was in the Game of Thrones TV show, looks like quite a few of them. I mean, 1 in 10 or something, maybe more than that. 1 in 8 are going to be chopped down because they're ill, and at least one of them's dead, and they're worried about branches falling on people. I tell you what, why didn't you just stop the people? And just stop the people and let the trees do their own thing, eh? That's what Treebeard would do. Anyway, so when it comes to environmental considerations, the Tories are just behaving like absolute barbarians. Hate them. I hate them. Anyway, we are having a general election at some point in the next 14 months. So, let that be a small bit of solitude. In the meantime, stick with us on Labour Social. Please subscribe to comment and like on the way out. And if you want to give super chats and things like that during our live presentations, that's really cool because a lot of these get demonetized for some reason still with YouTube. So we really appreciate all the support that you have given us and all the help that we can get. And until next time, I'll say thank you very much for watching. Hello, good evening, welcome, and goodbye.